Welcome back to The Night Shift, your safe space for talking about UFOs, UAPs, NHI, disclosure, ERBs. That's an Einstein-Rosen bridge, I think. And everything else your friends, family, and coworkers are so sick and tired of hearing you go on and on about. It's Friday. It's 2:05 p.m. on the East Coast, and that means it's time for Night Shift Live, Friday Night Live. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see all of you. If you're joining us in the chat, it's great to see you, Cosmic Serpent, excuse me. Zoltan's here. Paul, Chris. Hey, Chris. Looks like Obi-Wan Shinobi, Paris Diamonds, Cole Watkins, everybody. Great to see all of you. Thanks for being here. As always, if you're not already a subscriber, please consider subscribing. It's a great way to support the show, and it doesn't cost anything. It only takes like 2 seconds. Super easy. Got an exciting show for you today, a very fun show. We've upped our thumbnail game. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I think I've achieved black belt status in Midjourney, and I've really tried to make the thumbnails a little bit more dramatic. And we're talking about Dan Burish and George Knapp. Surprise, again today. It's the story that just won't go away. But we have an interesting twist today because we have a very special guest. Risa Cohen is going to be joining us in a little bit for the first hour. She is an experiencer herself. She was at Contact in the desert and became, I don't know if I could say it, something of a folk hero, UFO folk hero, for asking George Knapp a very good question about the Dan Burish case. We'll talk about that moment a little bit today and what all of it means. And we'll dig into some other weird connections that have surfaced recently between, believe it or not, Amy Eskridge and Dan Burish and J-Rod. There's a lot going on. So with that out of the way, let's say hi to our panel. Eric Schlimmer is with us, UAP therapist, host of the UAP Therapy Podcast, founder of Outcome Counseling, outdoorsman, super cool guy. How are you? Good to see you, Eric.
Excuse me. Well, flattery will get you everywhere. It's very good to be back. It's nice to meet Risa. And I love your people in the chat. Ever since they first interacted with me and recommended I find an elk costume so I can get into NORAD that I live near, these people are brilliant. That was a great idea.
How is Operation, what are we going to call that? We have to give that operation a name.
Operation Elk.
Operation Elk. I love it. He's a world-class musician. He's the composer of the Night Shift theme music. He's the producer of this Friday night live stream. He's also the wind beneath my wings and a very bright young man with a great future ahead of him. Xander Jones, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I'd also like to introduce the fan that is quite quickly becoming just as famous as I am.
Your biggest
fan
fan
is on. It's a nice hot day in the UK. You have upped your thumbnail game, by the way. It's superb. It's superb. And we're doing a lot of podcasts together at the moment because you appeared on my channel last week.
That's right.
And yeah, I'm back here producing as I always will be. But yes, it's great to be here.
It's great to have you, man. Risa Cohen. We met recently through a mutual friend, Brian Jackson, who is also the foremost expert on the Dan Burish saga, if I can call it that. I think it is. I'd say that's an accurate description, the case. How are you? It is so lovely to have you back and to finally be talking to you live.
Thank you. I'm doing amazing. Thank you so much for having me on your show. This is such an important subject, and I'm so glad that you've taken the time to really focus on this in many of your videos. It's really quite a incredible story, and I just hope that people all over the world begin to open their ears to it.
I was really surprised to find out that this moment had happened at Contact. And when I found out there was an audio recording of it and I listened to it, I was even more blown away because this story was sort of like, I didn't know anything about Dan Burish just like a year ago, really. And I had found this one interview with him and it just opened this door into the deepest rabbit hole probably in all of ufology. Mm-hmm. So when I heard you ask George Knapp about it, I was like completely mind blown. Can you talk to us a little bit about what is your background? How did you become interested in this topic? And more specifically, how did you get interested in Dan's story?
Well, I have always been an experiencer all my life. I've had a lot of different paranormal experiences. I think, as we were talking about just before the show, I was born with a really severe case of dyslexia. And it prevented me from really thinking in words. So most of my life, I've always been a nonverbal thinker, and experiencing the world in terms of my brain in a very nonlinear way. And I think that may have opened me up in ways that allowed me to connect with the world in maybe a non-material way. So all of my life, I've had experiences. Um, with regards to Dan Burish, I found his story just fascinating. I mean, it really blows the whole Bob Lazar story out. I mean, this is something that you just can't make up. And when I went to Contact in the Desert, I was really surprised that no one was talking about him. You know, it was as if they were like there was this maybe avoidance, or I wasn't sure what was happening. And so I approached Linda Howe about this, Dr. Howe, and I asked her. She really didn't have any responses to this, but people around had heard me asking about Dan Burish, and they very incredibly and beautifully connected me with Brian Jackson, who is the guru of Dan Burish. And we knew that George Knapp was coming to talk, and we knew that George Knapp could potentially have been maybe one of the reasons why Dan Burish's story went undercover or went underground. He had written a very scathing article about him in the 2004 UFO magazine. The article felt like it went beyond typical journalism. It felt as if George had really criticized his character. And I think that when that happens, there's something deeper that I kind of want to look at. It made me feel like I wanted to tap deeper. And so I got together with Brian and we composed a question for George. Brian was very helpful in framing this question. And the question was really, look, there's been 20 something years now that has gone by. A lot of things have happened. We've had a couple of congressional hearings, one in which Dan Burish's name was submitted in a report by Michael Schellenberger. And I wanted to know, George, do you think that maybe as time has passed, maybe there's a different light that we can shed on Dan Burish? What a story. What a phenomenal experience this man had. And he responded in a way that felt really hard, he got a little upset. And that was very curious to me. I don't feel like he really addressed the evidence that is still out there and substantiated. And I think Brian has put together an incredible website that has so much of this evidence already right there. It's there. This is not a could it be. This happened. And I think it's really time for us to acknowledge that.
Back up a little bit. And if you don't mind, for people who aren't familiar with Dan's story, or for people who maybe know a little bit about it, but don't know the whole story, what about this case is so fascinating to you? What stands out to you?
Well, the longevity of it, for one thing. I mean, he was apparently abducted when he was a young boy on a baseball field with his grandfather. And that abduction had a profound impact on him because apparently during that time that he was abducted, he changed. His brain chemistry changed. He came back with this profound knowledge or interest in science. That propelled into this incredible journey that he had where he was followed and courted and in many ways groomed by people in, the Black military or whatever we are trying to figure out who these men in black are. They groomed him for many, many years. And his story of working in S4 with this human from the future that wanted to come so that he could help shift the time frame so that his people could be saved. I mean, what a story. And I mean, I don't know if I can put the story in a few sentences. It's profound. And I really invite as many people as possible to go to to go to Brian Jackson's website and just start to look some of these videos and hear Dan talk about these things. He's consistent. His story is very concise. It doesn't change. And there's profound evidence that really, I think, defines him as a real legitimate person that's had this incredible experience.
He also has a lot of overlap with Bob Lazar's story. In fact, he even mentions element 115 in one particular interview that I was just looking at. He talks about how they used element 115 in a particular type of way to generate a wormhole device that they could use to see various different timelines, and they tried to send someone through it. He talks about how they tried to basically use it to transport stuff, but there was a volunteer who went through who didn't survive. And as he's telling this story, it must be hours. I mean, I don't know how many total hours of interviews with him, but he's very relatable. Like his reactions to as he's describing the things he's remembering, his physicality matches what you would imagine he was feeling at the time. And I think that translates really well. And it's interesting to hear other people react to the way that he presents, because I think he presents like when you see certain people talk about their stories, Jake Barber is another one, right? Jake Barber did this great interview with Ross Coulthart where he talked about having a telepathic communication with a craft, and he kind of gets choked up on camera and he sort of tears up for a minute. He has this emotional moment. Same thing with Burish. Yes. And I think if you, as an empathetic person, it's that's like a big blinking, flashing light. Like, pay attention to this.
Right. It's interesting because, I'm really intrigued with the relationship that he had with the J-Rod. That he knew his name, that he knew where he came from, he knew his wife and his child, and that the J-Rod had showed him these things, that they had a relationship. I mean, there's really no other story like that I can think of in the entire ufology history. I mean, when we look back, who has had that moment? The closest person that I can think of is Whitley Strieber, who had a relationship with an extraterrestrial and potentially mated with that human or that person or entity. But other than that, I mean, this relationship that Dan had with this J-Rod was just so endearing and beautiful and spiritual. It really encompasses so much. And I think that is where we want to go with the stories, to learn about that relationship and how it changed his life.
For people who are not as up to speed on exactly what the details of this story are, in broad terms, in broad strokes, Dan Burish claimed to have been one of a team of microbiologists who was assigned to work at Area S4 during the period of the early 90s for, I don't know how many years it was, but I think it was longer than Bob Lazar was supposedly there. Yeah. And his task was to basically oversee a being known as J-Rod that was a survivor of a crash, stored in a very, very secure, extremely specialized, custom-built storage facility called the Clean Sphere. Right. And Burish and his team would be sent in to basically take biological samples from this being, to communicate with it, to exchange information. He, unlike a lot of people who have fantastic stories to tell, one of the things I think that leaps out at me about Dan's method of telling his story is how procedural it all is. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of mundane detail. Like you'll listen to the whole interview and there's a lot of like mind-blowing information in there, but a lot of it is also just like how we walk down the hallway, and then where do the stripe on the floor, and you turn left to go, and this is what's on the wall, and this is the music they play on the airplane when you come into land, and this is how I get into the suit, and how do I hook into the air filtration system with my special pressurized biological suit. And it's just detail after detail. And it seems like one of those stories that the longer you look at it, just the more facets of it come out and are revealed. in fact, Xander, you had this might be a good time to mention the Amy Eskridge connection that someone reached out to you about.
So yeah, on our I'm a bit loud. Hold on. On our podcast that I started a sort of like a late night coffee morning style softly spoken talk show, if you will, on my channel last week, and you were obviously going to be the first guest. So we talked about Burish because I did a Burish video last week, and somebody in the comments said, "Did you know Amy Eskridge talked about this?" And I was like, "What?" So let me get his name because he deserves a little bit of credit. So his name was Tigrig, so thank you very much, Tigrig. So he even sent the link to the clip, and I can share the clip. Do you want to give a little bit of a background on the time travel human from the future?
Yeah, just to set up some context for people listening. So the one of the key elements of Dan Burish's story is that in his experience working with J-Rod, this being has the name is a designation. J-Rod isn't his actual name, but it's the name they use. He learns that they're basically future humans. The more or less the aliens that we were dealing with, or the extraterrestrials that we're dealing with, are future humans, but they're from two different separate civilizations that branch off. Apparently, according to Dan anyway, there's a cataclysm in our near future, and the cataclysm destroys most life on Earth. One group of people retreats underground and rebuilds their civilization, and then eventually leaves and goes out to colonize another region of space. And another group is on the surface. There's two different groups though, and one group goes off and they fork, and each group, when they fork off, they form their own separate sort of evolutionary branch. And they call these two branches the P47s and the P52s. P stands for present, 47 stands for plus 47,000 years. P52 is plus 52,000 years from our present. So they designate these two types of beings as future humans, not alien, extraterrestrial. One of them is from 52,000 years in the future. One of them is from 47,000 years in the future. And supposedly they have traveled back to before this calamity happens, or this catastrophe, to gather data about the pre-disaster time and genetic material and biological samples and all the rest of it. And that's as far as I know what's going on. But Amy Eskridge has this really weird exchange with Hal Puthoff, and it comes up again. And if you've got that clip, they'll...
This investor brings Hal to our house 3 times. I was present for one of the times. I happened to be home from Seattle at the same time that Hal came over. And I sat with him in my dining room over there at the dining room table. And he was talking about ultra-terrestrials. And basically ultra-terrestrials are like, he talks about extraterrestrial. Extra implies that they're from somewhere else, from the outside. Extra implies they're from not here, from outside. Ultra-terrestrial.
They're from the doll universe.
They're not necessarily from the outside. They're from here.
Oh, so they're like ascended beings, or
No.
So then they're you, high
No.
IQ.
So the ultra-terrestrials, I'll just tell you, the ultra-terrestrials, I think, have you heard of the P52s and the P47s? Do you know what that is? They're us from the future. They're from here. They are you. They are me. They're from here, from the future. P47 is present plus 47,000 years. P52 is present plus 52,000 years. And basically there's a calamity, right? So there's like a apocalypse scenario in the near future. It wipes out most of like everything, man. And there's the ones that go underground and survive, right? And then there's the ones that somehow stay on the surface and miraculously don't die.
So Amy Eskridge is or was the CEO and founder of an organization called the Institute for Exotic Science in Huntsville, Alabama, which is where also the UAP. What is the group that does UAP research? They're based.
So there was Gravity LLC that was founded by is it Dr. Li Ming or something similar to that?
Ning Li.
Ning Li. That's it. Again, somebody who it's a bit of a touchy area, but somebody who effectively left the scene relatively quickly. Let's put it that way. What Amy's talking about there as well. Hal has talked about ultra-terrestrials. It's literally in a paper he's written. So there's stuff there to process. That's for sure.
You have Hal Puthoff, who is widely acknowledged to be at or very near to the center of the reverse engineering project that's been going on for at least the last 40 years or whatever. He's started the at Stanford Research Institute, the remote viewing Stargate program there with Russell Targ, and did all of this stuff. So he's foundational to the whole moment that we're in terms of the actual research that goes into it. He was presented. He was at that congressional hearing wasn't he there with Eric Davis? No, I think Eric Davis wasn't there with Hal, but Hal has spoken about this many times. And so here he is, basically, according to Amy Eskridge anyway, saying that the P-47 and the P-52 story is a real thing, that actually does happen. Ross Coulthart has said that he's been told future humans is what we're dealing with. This has something to do with future humans. And it seems like everybody is in agreement that there's some kind of big event that is out there on the horizon, which could mean anything. But everybody from John Ramirez to Ross Coulthart has said it. Lou Elizondo has alluded to it a bunch of times. I mean, other people have mentioned it. It seems like no matter how how you look at the Dan Burish story, it just keeps cropping up again and again. And it seems like the longer we go on, the more of his story seems to be corroborated by other people.
Just before we continue as well, I've put the journal PDF I just showed that was written by Puthoff himself. I've just put in the live links section of our Discord, and that's the section of our Discord that I try and share as much of the information from the show as possible. So if you join the Discord, you can find the link to read the thing in full for yourself. Obviously, we don't have time to read it ourselves here.
This is which one?
The Hal Puthoff's, where it's sort of a paper where he talks about what these NHI could be, and that's where he talks about ultra-terrestrials. So it's not something that Amy's just pulled out of the air there. It's quite clearly something Puthoff's talked about.
So just to wrap that up, I mean, of course, Amy is, obviously drinking a little bit in the clip, and everybody notices that. But there's a larger story there. Apparently, it's one that I don't feel comfortable really getting into the details of, but it's available on Reddit for people who want to look into it. But she passed away under mysterious circumstances shortly after that interview. And if you look into the story, it's very strange. It's very weird. It's clear that there was something going on beyond what we're able to see on the surface here. So I don't know. I don't know. What do you guys make of this? Risa, what do you think about the more fantastic aspects of it? I mean, how far did you go down the Burish rabbit hole?
Well, I'm still going down it.
You're still going down it. How long have you been looking into this?
For about a year now, I would say, probably about a year. I mean, I was definitely a big Bob Lazar fan. I love getting into the research of him. But for me, my interest in this world is really in the non-material world. And that's why I find Dan Burish's story just so incredible and so awakening. But all of this about the timelines is just fascinating and intriguing, and where we are on this divergent timeline. It is interesting. I just wanted to ask you, could you talk a little bit about this woman, Amy? I actually wasn't aware of this tape, and I'm curious to know. This is her connecting with Paul. What do you? How did that meeting actually happen?
Oh, okay. So yeah, man, where do you even start? Amy Eskridge is a really interesting case, and I have her. I'll read her obituary because that's what comes up when you search her name, and then I am going to show a clip of the organization that she started, a video that they have on YouTube. But her obituary says, a brilliant mind left us when Amy Catherine Eskridge went to her eternal rest in the Lord on Saturday, June 11th, 2022. At just age 34, Amy already had a beautiful vision for life and the cosmos. She had a genius for science and questioned the conventional wisdom on everything from the universe to nanoparticles of the atom. She was an astute entrepreneur as chairwoman and president of the Institute for Exotic Science in Huntsville, Alabama, which she co-founded. Amy's passion for space grew from childhood in the Rocket City. After her graduation from UAH with a double major in chemistry and biology, she became an interdisciplinarian and a master of electrical engineering, chemistry, physics, genetic engineering, and nanotechnology. This girl was genius.
Wow.
Amy is survived by her parents, Kathy and Richard Eskridge, brothers Matt and Michael. Her father works for NASA, and she formed this group called the Institute for Exotic Science, which is a group made up of researchers who had worked for NASA or for contractors that had been hired by NASA. And basically, they had conducted research into anti-gravity technology, and it was successful. And the reason Amy is like on the radar in the UFO community is because Huntsville, Alabama is where all of the NASA science research stuff is really like concentrated. And she came forward with this interview where she was intoxicated, and she said, I can tell you the names of so many scientists who have worked on projects that have built the prototype, they switch it on, it works. The first time you turn it on, you're getting amazing results. It's doing what it's supposed to do. You go back to NASA to apply for more funding. They cancel your project. They sell your prototype to a scrap metal dealer. They melt it down and destroy it. And she's like, this has happened so many times. There are scientists who are like suicidal over it because they know that we could have anti-gravity technology. They've built it. They've had it in the lab. So what Institute for Exotic Science was all about was basically gathering together all of these minds, these researchers, and saying, well, if NASA doesn't want to fund your research, that's their loss. We will do it. Let's get together with some billionaire venture capital people and we'll develop this technology in the private sector. And so as I understand it, and I'm not going to go any deeper into the story than that. I'm not qualified as an investigative reporter to do that. It's not my wheelhouse and it's too rich for my blood. But my understanding is they were starting to have success. Like she was trying to get in touch with Jeremy Corbell. She was trying to get in touch with, Lou Elizondo and other people. She talks about all this stuff in these interviews to jump on that whistleblower train that was leaving the station around 2017 and in the subsequent years. There's a clip here I can share with you guys, and this might flesh it out a little bit more about why I keep, we go back to this woman all the time and show these clips. Let me see if I can pull it up for you here. Here it is. Xander, I'm going to send this to you in the chat.
Oh, private chat. Okay.
And then here we go. Just faster.
Is it?
Maybe. I don't know. If I do it, the whole computer will freeze.
Yes, it will be quicker. Oh, wait. Oh, it's not found. Hold on. You sent me a second link.
Try that one. I just sent it back to you.
Hey, there we go.
Space Telescope and transportation to Mars and other celestial bodies. This built on the Space 1.0 discoveries of Galileo and other early astronomers. These accomplishments occurred in the government-driven environment of the first space race, known as Space 2.0, where few risks were taken, schedules were relaxed, and mismanagement of funds created stalled progress. Today, however, is the Space 4.0 era, where Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and other space barons are driving the commercialization of space with emphasis on taking calculated risks, where schedules are tight and cost minimization is paramount. Musk's goal is a 65% reduction in the cost of a pound of cargo delivered to Earth orbit, and he is almost there. The Barons' objectives, of course, are to facilitate the commercialization of space exploration in the same manner as the Hudson's Bay Company commercialized the seaborne trade routes of the 15th and 16th centuries. The Space Barons' destinations, however, are Earth orbit, the Moon, Mars, the asteroid belts, and beyond. If Huntsville is to remain a key player, it must evolve itself from beyond the old culture, and we must become the leader under the new Space 4.0 rule set. We must course correct to bring new technology to the industry by adopting commercial practices. The Institute for Exotic Science provides the commercially oriented technology development infrastructure that the industry needs. Huntsville's Marshall Space Flight Center and Redstone Arsenal have shelves full of technology that began under the old methods but which were abandoned along the way. These technologies are available for those asking or are in the hands of the many local scientists who partially developed them. Inventor Bill Dent was working on detecting buried explosives on the roadside when the end of the Iraq War caused his project to be canceled. Now at the Institute, he is working to apply the same technology for detection of illicit drugs in sealed ocean-going shipping containers. Retired NASA scientist Richard Eskridge is working to apply his thruster technology to meet the requirements of tens of thousands of small satellites that are planned for launch to provide internet service to the developing world. At the Institute, we harness this repository of technologies by providing a platform where the inventor can become a member of our team of diverse technical and business talents that can further mature the technology and take the resulting products to market and spin out companies that create value for the inventors, the Institute, and the global space economy. The Institute received an initial $555,000 investment and seeks tens of millions to expand into permanent facilities, build its inventory of science and technology assets, and produce the leading-edge technologies needed to fully take advantage of the business opportunities presented by the new space economy. Our 10-year vision is a campus holding hundreds of employees, dozens of spin-out companies, and highly profitable commercial operations. Launchpad prize money will be used to organize this fundraising effort.
It's just such a weird connection. It's such a weird connection. She's definitely, this is a person who's not a nobody, not just like a weird person on the internet making videos talking about this stuff. This is a person who's neck deep in this research world, who's talking to Hal Puthoff in her living room at her dining room table. And he's saying things that are tying into stuff that Dan Burish said all these years ago. And I guess that, at the heart of the question really is, when you were at Contact and you asked George about Dan, he got really upset. Would you say he got upset? How would you characterize his response? I don't want to.
Yeah, he got edgy. He got really edgy. And he again tried to create all these disparaging comments about him. But for me, actually, Clint, the thing that really was more striking was the conversation that I had with him after the presentation.
Can you talk about that? What happened?
So I was the second person to ask this question, and there was no open discussion. It was very, no, he's a fraud, and all these reasons why. And then the question was over, and there were other questions that went on. And then after the interview, the whole presentation was over, I'm in the front row and I'm packing up my backpack, and I hear this, hey, if you have any other evidence, please bring it forward. I'd like to know what it is. And it's George from the stage calling out to me.
That had to feel weird.
And I'm looking around like, is someone talking to me? And it's George from the stage calling me, telling me that, and he's come now to the edge of the stage. And I now have come off my seat and I'm approaching him slightly because he's talking to me. And I said, well, there is a lot of evidence. I'd love to connect with you. And, my goal was to share with him Brian's website and just to go through it. But every time I would bring something that might, be something that might be of value, he cut it down. And, it became this conversation that went nowhere. And I ended up saying, look, George, I don't want to upset you anymore. I seem to have upset you. I am so sorry. Can we just, hug and take a photo together? And
Hug it out.
we did. He gave me his card. I have contacted him since then. I've not heard a response from him. But the question that remains, if Dan Burish is really a nobody, then why the constant need to defend the need? I mean, I've been in contact with other journalists, and their approach is really different. They really talk about the evidence, but that wasn't the case with George. It was really more about his character. And so there's something going on, and I just would love to get to the bottom of it.
I noticed that too. He seems to shut it down based on like, this guy is a fraud or a goofball or whatever. What we have the clip. We can play it in a second, but he doesn't. He goes. He says he was a scientist. He wasn't. That's all he says on it. But it's not true. He was a scientist. He spoke at Caltech. He presented in an auditorium full of people. There's a video of the event. He says, well, we don't have any examples of or any samples of his degrees or any evidence that he had a degree from where he claimed. That's not true either. That's on the Dan Burish archive that Brian Jackson put together. And you're right. It seems like maybe we should just play that clip and let people decide for themselves what they think.
Where
do you have that,
clip?
Xander?
No.
You don't have? I thought we had it from 2 weeks ago.
Oh, did we? I think I uploaded it, didn't I? Because
I've got it.
You've got it. Okay, great. Just before you do play that, I do, in some sense, I love George Knapp. Obviously, like I would kind of like to come to his defense ever so slightly. Like, the guy is still at the forefront of what's going on. He's got a limited amount of bandwidth to really focus on things, and I guess there may even be part of, like, look, going into the Burish story, you've got a month's worth of content to get through, like, to really try and understand what's going on and to find out, like, what's true and what's not. George doesn't have a month spare. He's still right there. He's still on Weaponized in that strange cabin in the woods on the forefront.
The little teeny tiny cabin that's so huge
amazing,
on the inside.
And I can't commend him enough for pushing forwards. Dan Burish did happen like over 15 years ago at this point. I don't blame him whatsoever for just wanting to move on and work with what we've got to work with right now, because in some sense that's a much easier way to push the agenda forward, is to contact the Matt Browns and to interview them, because they are literally right there still, whereas Burish is very much in the past. I don't think that could be forever. I would love for there to be a Burish revival, and maybe at that point he will be able to give it the bandwidth that maybe it, and I agree with you, does deserve. But I just wanted to come to his defense ever so slightly, because he's not here to provide a response and things like that.
Oh, what 100% agree.
He's an absolute god.
I love George Knapp.
Yeah.
I do. And I was one of the people when I was younger and I was learning about this for the first time. George Knapp was at that time probably in his 40s or late 30s or early 40s. He had already been doing this for years. I heard about Bob Lazar through George Knapp. there's no question that George Knapp deserves all the respect. I mean, we wouldn't be where we're at today without him. That's a fact. So nothing we're saying here is to take anything away from what George has done and his experience and all of that. He is the OG for sure. It's just a weird, but the reaction that he had to a straightforward question about a very obviously weird case was just uncharacteristic, I think. It surprised
definitely.
all of us when we heard, it was the tone, it was the way that he said it.
Way to describe it. It was uncharacteristic, yeah.
And I think as fans of George Knapp and also people who are interested in this really interesting story, it's kind of like, well, hold on a second. That's weird because you're saying he's not a scientist, but yet here he is on the web page at Caltech. There's his name and you can go watch the video of that. So how did you arrive at that conclusion that he's not a scientist? Not that speaking at Caltech automatically makes you a scientist, but if you're a fraud, it's unlikely that you would book an auditorium under your actual name at Caltech and then surround yourself with brilliant people who could call you out and then try to like make up a bunch of bullshit. Just seems unusual.
So an interesting tidbit around Burish's timeline, really. Timeline, there's a play on words, I guess. Other things have happened since he started whistleblowing. So I don't know. Obi-Wan Shinobi in the comments pointed out, when did he speak at Caltech? Did it happen before or after the article? That's probably quite an important point. Because he gave those initial interviews and then a whole load of other events happened in the Burish timeline, and maybe Caltech was one of them. I don't know. I don't know that detail.
Let's look it up. That's a great question. Because it's bioengineering seminar. It's still on the webpage. It's right there now. You can go there and see. It's, let's see here. I'll share my screen. March 10th, 2008. So this would have been after George Knapp wrote the article in 2004,
Right.
which is available on our website. If you go to teamnightshift.com and you click the research tab and you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see George Knapp, Dan Burish article. You can click it. I've also put it in the chat, and it's in the links at the Discord, live links. But even, it just seems strange to me that George, with his knowledge and experience and acumen for looking at people and sort of ascertaining whether or not they're being truthful, that he would say this guy has no scientific ability, is a fraud, when clearly that's not the case. I don't know how you would arrive at that conclusion.
He wasn't a security guard. He was, but he wasn't. It's not. As I said to you when we spoke, I could quite easily these days, probably within a day, convince somebody that I'm a microbiologist or a biologist of some sort over the internet. Like I could do some very light reading and searching with Google and AI and ChatGPT and stuff. Back then, and it was his first interviews were in the early 2000s, I think.
Right, 2000, one or two.
You just couldn't do that. You couldn't learn within a day or within even a month how to convince enough people to with a story about how you're a biologist when you're just not a biologist. It just wasn't possible back then. You couldn't. You had to still attend. University was still important. I think that's probably what I'm still saying.
You
College
just couldn't
was still
fake
important
it.
back then. Yeah.
And you certainly couldn't fake it for like 9 hours of interviews. Like you'd have to sit there, and if you go to the Burish Archive website, and I'll go there on this link here. We'll just go to the Burish Archive, and we have that clip that we can pull of Dan talking. Here we go. Let's do. Got it there. Okay. So here it is. I mean, you can go to video library. And if I just scroll down to, where was the one in 2018, do we say? 2007, November 18th. Okay, Project Camelot.
They were used for passing information and passing inhabitants this direction.
Oh, by other cultures coming this way,
He's
but
talking
not
about the
by us.
Stargates right now.
By P+45s and P+52s, both Orions and J-Rods. The treaties were basically inflicted on us by the Orions. As they were enforced upon us by the Orions that we needed to do what we needed to do when they figured out that we weren't able to handle the issue ourselves. They looked at their own history and said, huh, look at the cavemen and women. Then I found out that because he had carried the attitude that the Magi were not closely watching anything which was like NEOs or any, the near-Earth orbiting asteroids or anything like that. They weren't concerned about it at all. Well, then subsequently during a conversation, I found out that in fact they were. The information from her relative was in fact that they were aware that...
This goes on, but here's his Caltech presentation.
Second, what these articles are that are hovering transiently above the surface of any silicate, we don't know. We still don't know. We believe that they're possibly plasma, and we're going to be outlining the basic evidence to support that it's a possible plasma here in a moment. Now, 3 years prior to this circuit, a circuit which can be subdivided and then produces itself on both sides of the subdivision, something like an autocatalytic mechanism, if you take Fleischhacker's definition, was seen 3 years prior. And here you see in the natural coloration of the portals as they're handing substances back and forth. The white dots are the portals, and you can see them actually passing material back and forth, kind of like, what I remember the
Harlem Globetrotters.
The Harlem Globetrotters,
Yeah.
with a magic circle.
So he's talking about in this clip, he's talking about a peculiar silicate-associated phenomenon that more or less says that, and this is just my surface level understanding. Some types of rock formations, because of the crystalline structure that is inherent within the rock formation, when exposed to a particular frequencies of energy, can spontaneously generate wormholes. And those wormholes are capable of transmitting information back and forth. And apparently in his lab, his experiments, what he's looking at here, he's talking about this thing called the Ganesh particle. And he's suggesting that he's hypothesizing that these micro, tiny, teeny wormholes open up, and somehow information makes its way through and then takes an effect in the physical world on biological systems or so. And it's this alternative hypothesis for the origin of life. It's this whole thing. But without without the proper training, I don't know what I'm really looking at. I just know that that's what I understand he's explaining. I just don't see how a person can, even if you sat around and studied for,
it takes some
months.
balls. It takes some balls to even hire out. Like, I don't know if that auditorium is just available for hire, but that auditorium has had, it's had Hawking. I looked this up. It's had Hawking. It's had Bill Gates. It's had Patrick Stewart. They've all done talks in that auditorium, and it's quite a prestigious auditorium. Maybe it is available for hire, and he's just talking to nobody there. I don't know, but it takes some balls to do that. Either way.
The Beckman Institute Auditorium at Caltech. Okay, I'm looking at it here. Yeah, Beckman. It's a beautiful building. Wow. Stephen Hawking spoke there, presented there?
Yep.
Wow.
It's there's a sort of like a similar one in the UK, and if it's similar to the one in the UK, it is prestigious in the fact that it's reserved for people that have something to say, and it's not just a place where you can just have a party. It's not a place you can rent out and
you're not having your bar mitzvah
have
there.
a wedding there. It is reserved. Like, the universities make enough money. They don't need to hire out this space to anybody that wants it. The space is kind of, the prestige of the space makes their university more appealing, and that's what the Beckman Institute, the Beckman Auditorium is for Caltech, as far as I know. Maybe I'm wrong, but I know those places exist in the UK as well.
That's just... It's really interesting. It's a long presentation, but it's not that, it's not so long that you couldn't sit through and watch it. I've watched it a couple of times, and I'm just, barely following it. But it seems like, he definitely has a coherent hypothesis, and he's done a significant amount of research. He's got evidence. He's presenting it in a very organized way. The whole presentation doesn't seem like it's there's no reason you would be there unless you were interested in this stuff.
There's
no
nothing
money
fun
to
about
be made.
No money to
There's
be
no
made off this.
None at all. It's boring as hell. It's nothing about this is. I mean, unless you're really, really interested in this story or the science behind it, I can't imagine why you would just do this. So anyway, I don't know. That's where I'm at with Dan Burish. We have another interview I'm dropping tomorrow, actually, with this one's with Brian Jackson and Martin Vass, who's another Dan Burish researcher, and we talk about it again for another 2.5 hours, and we go even deeper. But it's just the story that won't die. Risa, you said you had your own experiences, and you've had them for your entire life. Can you talk a little bit about what types of experiences you've had, and how they relate back to ufology in general?
Sure, absolutely. So, as I had mentioned, before to you, I was born with a pretty severe condition of dyslexia, and I've always been a person living in a non-verbal world. I don't think verbally. I think non-verbally, non-linearly, and I think that has always kind of opened me up to be a little bit more sensitive to the non-material world. So with that, yes, I'm also, one thing to know about me is I'm a dancer, I'm a professional dancer, and I was a dance teacher for 28 years, contemporary dance, modern dance, choreography. I was coming home from rehearsal. This is probably the most significant thing that ever happened to me. I was driving on the highway after a long rehearsal. And as you know, on the highway, when it's dusk, the lights begin to go on, and they go on in canon, right? So one light, the next light, the next light, next light. And it's a beautiful dance in a way of looking at the way the lights come on the highway. And I was driving home from rehearsal, looking at the lights coming on as it was about 7:30 at night. And from a very far distance, a large disc came out of the sky, and it began to mimic these lights that were going on the highway. So it would strobe with them, and it flew down in a very powerful way. It was fast. It continued to strobe with the lights right in front of my car. And as it approached about 30 feet from my car, this strobing light, mimicking the lights that were strobing, it just disappeared and flew up. And so I always wanted to believe that entity came down to dance for me after my rehearsal. That was one time that I had an experience like that. Another time was a much more of a distant experience where I was looking up at the sky one night with my son. We saw a beautiful formation of stars in the sky. Within an instant, the formation shifted, and then the whole formation blinked out and disappeared. I have no idea what that was, but I can tell you that in all these times that I had these experiences, I always felt an overwhelming sense of love and joy. I've also had experiences with having visitation from deceased relatives that have come to let me know that they were okay. That was very important. So things like that have happened in my life, but those two experiences with UFOs or whatever they might be were probably the most profound. I think the experience with my mother when she came back to let me know she was okay was pretty profound too.
But those experiences over time, did you ever feel like you were being communicated with by something that was non-human? Did you ever have that sense?
I had a sense that absolutely, and to be directed on a certain path to continue to be open to that, absolutely, yes. And I don't know what that is, but I think these stories of Dan Burish and Whitley Strieber and all of these experiencers and Chris Bledsoe, I think all of these people coming forward to sharing these experiences are so important. And I think it's important for us as a planet to listen to them and to hear what the underlying message is. And the message really to me is about keeping this planet strong and healthy. That is the major goal here. And I think we all need to tap into that to make sure that we begin to love each other and find compassion on this planet, which is now needing that more than ever. I mean, I think that these messages are coming stronger now than they have ever come. And people are getting louder with their messages. And I think people are listening more because we need to hear this. This is the time to make these changes of light and love. And so that's why these stories are so important. It's not so much about, for me, all the disclosure. We know it's happening. It's now really time. I mean, yes, disclosure, but it's time to listen now. And what I mean by, I think we need to stop trying to prove this. We already know this. We need to act like it's a known fact and move on. That's what I'm trying to say. Because moving on will be an important progress for us, for our planet.
Were you? I'm just curious. Were you always so vocal about your thoughts on this subject, or did you kind of keep it close to the vest until recently, or how's that played out?
I guess I've kept it a little bit close to the vest because I've been concerned about ridicule from my community, from just, my job. And, being a teacher, you don't always want to be, there's certain lines you need to follow working in the school. So, but recently I think I've become much more vocal about it. I've also retired as a teacher, which has given me some more freedom to speak as well.
I want to be respectful of your time, and I know that you said you had an hour to give us, but just real quick before you go, can you talk to people out there? We have a lot of people in our audience who are new to this subject. They may have been fascinated with it for their whole lives, but they have just recently started to really look into it and to connect with a community of other people who are interested in it. What might you say to people out there who are, following this topic? They're really interested in it, but they're afraid of talking about it openly because of the stigma. What would you tell those people?
I would say, if you can, go to conferences, meet fellow experiencers. When I went to Contact in the Desert, it was the first time I'd ever been to any kind of community that had fellow experiencers and just people that were involved in this community. I'd never been to any kind of conference or even spoken about this publicly. So if you have any interest or desire, begin by going to a conference or even going to your local MUFON annual, I believe they have monthly meetings, but begin to meet people. It is so freeing to talk to people. I had such an incredible time at Contact in the Desert. The conference was so well put on. I have to say that the folks that put that on did an incredible job of organizing all the different workshops and lectures, and the opportunity to meet these presenters were I got to go meet Nick Pope was in the hallway. I got to go talk to him. Just amazing experience. So that would be my first would be, don't do it online. Like, get out of your house.
Yeah.
And go physically meet people in your community, through MUFON or different conferences. It is just so inspiring, and it will really give you the confidence to begin talking more about this with your family members or your friends.
Risa, that is a perfect place to leave it. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and hang out with us for an hour today. This has been awesome.
And thank you for all the work that you've done, Clint, and all of the rest of you as well. Just getting to get the word out. Eric and Xander, thank you again for your work on this too. I hope that we continue to move forward on this journey.
I'm sure we'll stay in touch, and if anything else comes up, you always have a chair here, so welcome back anytime.
Thank you so much, Clint. Take care. All right, you guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Risa. Thank you.
Bye, Risa.
Thank you very much.
That's Risa Cohen, everybody. Shout out in the chat for Risa. And first conference, and found herself face-to-face with George Knapp, having a conversation about Dan Burish. That's pretty awesome.
I can just tell. I imagine Eric's been writing notes the last hour and just has so many things that he wants. Yeah, there we go.
I get nervous when Eric's quiet for too long because I'm afraid he's going to drop a bomb right in the middle of the conversation. Did you guys know? Man, what are you taking notes on there, Eric? What do you have?
Well,
what do you think?
It's funny about notes. I'm one of few therapists. I never take notes during sessions. A lot of therapists do, because I think the client thinks I'm writing down, oh my God, this person's crazy. So I don't take notes usually, but I was writing some stuff down because it's very complex conversation, and everything's really important. Okay. But first, I must offer some accolades here because Risa felt comfortable enough to come on here because she knew she wasn't going to be ridiculed, and she knows we're a friendly bunch. So I thought it was a great compliment to Night Shift that she would agree to do this. And I don't know if that's registered with you guys.
Well, I guess it is a compliment, isn't it? Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. So I had a couple thoughts on Dan Burish because at one point, I think someone said something like, well, why, like, how did George Knapp come to say, I just don't believe this guy? And there are only three possibilities, and he did this with Bob Lazar, okay? So we have kind of similar stories, but dramatically different outcomes. So this person I believe and this person I didn't. And so Knapp found supportive evidence. That's one option. He found counter evidence or both. That's it, right? So using that matrix, he did not find counter evidence with Lazar. We know that to be true. And we know he found counter evidence with Burish. Okay, so and that's the consistent story Knapp has told, where Knapp found something that was fishy. Now, when it comes to his response, I don't know. I've never even met George Knapp. I think he's tired of people thinking this story's true. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's true or not true. He's like, oh my God, here we go again. Yeah, I thought we put this to bed years ago. I told you people this, right? So I think that's why he's getting a little impatient. So my opinion of Burish, not that anyone really asked, is I'm very cautious. I'm not discounting him. I'm not all in at this point. And I wrote down three things that had me be a bit cautious. So I have spoken at about 30 colleges. No one has ever checked my credentials, ever. They just took my word for it. Okay, so I have that. Knapp is a pretty trustworthy person, so I have that. And then there's just a gut check, which is a very non-scientific way. So it's like, well, what does it feel like?
In some ways, it's the best check.
Right.
It's almost always right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example I use in therapy. Occasionally, I'll have a spouse, being the wife or the girlfriend, come in, and they think the husband or boyfriend is up to something fishy, okay? And they'll present some evidence, and I'll say, well, as an objective viewer, and eventually I stop the conversation. I go, what does your gut tell you? And if she says, he's cheating on me, I go, he's cheating on me. And that's been proven 100%, right? So if you think he's doing it, he's probably doing it. If you have to check his phone, you already know what you're going to find, right?
Yes.
So I'm a bit cautious with Burish. If it turns out to be true, I won't be greatly surprised. The Bob Lazar thing for me is a little weird because I don't think Bob Lazar has presented robust evidence, but it's too good. I won't let it go because it's such a good story. It's a story that got me into UAPs to begin with, so I have affection toward it. So those are my thoughts on that. We'll have to see where this goes. If there are specific things lacking, like, well, he doesn't have his diploma, then someone needs to go get it and just put these matters to bed.
Fair point. That's nicely put.
Somebody else that may have an opinion. Are you ready? You ready, Chris? You good? All right, good.
We told you that occasionally we would have a special guest just drop in unannounced, and this is one of those occasions. Please welcome host of Area 52, the great and powerful, Chris Ramsey. How you doing, buddy?
What's up, fellas? How are you guys doing?
Love your hat.
Thanks. Yeah, you got one coming to you as well.
Oh, I love it. I can't wait.
Yeah, they're in the mail and over to the UK. That'll probably take a few months. But
yeah, I'll pay that £100 tax or whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly. You will get probably tax on that.
I'll pay it. I'll pay whatever it takes. I need it.
Yeah.
Chris, you just because you showed up when we were talking about it, we don't have to stay on this, but just while we're on it, where do you fall on Dan Burish? Like, just for the people.
It's similar to where I fall with a lot of everything in this space. Is at first super low conviction. Obviously, I think that's the smart choice rather than just being like, I believe him, and So I don't really believe anything. I kind of just like hold it in very low conviction. I don't dismiss it, but then as time goes forward, I try to just find piece of information that could or might corroborate, and then take the people who are corroborating that. I take them out of context and look at, are they known to be perpetrating, falsehoods and weigh that against everything else. And for now, I think after looking at Brian Jackson's work, it definitely increased that level of conviction that I had initially for him. And, as Eric just mentioned, you guys talked about George Knapp not being on board with it. For me, that really doesn't affect how I see it. I think that, again, if you're going to, make a statement like that, I would rather that be followed up with like, oh, here's the proof, here's why, rather than just his take. Because I do trust that he did some investigative journalism. Obviously, it's what he's known for. But, that'd be cool to see. Like, what did you come up with? What did you find? I would love to, and if it's just like, oh, there's no school records. Well, I mean, what are we talking about here? I mean, Bob also, so, these type of inconsistencies do come into play. And I just wonder why that is. Does he know something we don't know? Or is it like, Eric had just like a gut check that, this guy just doesn't, the timing of it as well. We gotta also acknowledge that this wasn't ever prior to Bob Lazar. And I think everything that comes out after Bob that mentions S4 needs to be held, kind of in a separate category. If
like it's been influenced by what Bob had to say.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, even I just read through the special operations manual from Majestic 12 leak, right? That went to Don Berliner in 94.
Oh, the Psalm 101?
Yeah.
You've got it? You got a copy of that?
Well, I mean, it was just the copy that Ryan Woods sort of made, right? So just kind of looking through that. I thought it was really interesting, and it seems plausible. It seems like, hey, that might be a real thing. And in there, they do mention S4, but that again came out in '94. So it's like,
right.
It's not. Yeah, I don't know what to make of it.
It's weird because it's like Xander and I were watching this clip in the green room before we went live today, and it was Dan talking about the Einstein-Rosen bridge wormhole generators that they had built. He's like, there are natural formations that generate wormholes, and they are known about. There's like certain locations on Earth that have these naturally occurring wormholes that open it periodically at certain times. Then they have the ones that they built. And then the ones that they built, he says, they use element 115 injected into some kind of a cylinder with argon gas, and they have some kind of he's like, I'm not a physicist, but it's element 115 that they use. And he says it specifically, the 115 heavy element variety that we got from the J-Rods. And then he goes, this is a Project Camelot interview. The interviewer asked him something about Project Serpo. You're familiar with the Serpo story, right?
Yeah.
So Dan, and if people don't know Serpo, I'll explain it in just a second. But Dan says, Serpo, this is a really interesting answer to this question. He goes, Serpo was actually a cover story for the wormhole technology we were developing in-house. Like, we had those at S4. Serpo was the cover story that we put out, or that was put out, to basically distract people away from the idea that we were building these things in a research facility. We wanted people to think, or whoever they were that put the story out, the Serpo story. And for people who don't know, Serpo is just it's a story from the early 1960s or mid 1960s that basically says that a group of people were sent to live on an alien world in an exchange program for I think it was 5 years or something, or 10 years. It was like a decade period of time. And they had supposedly all of their supplies for this entire trip were loaded onto this gigantic transport ship. And then it was brought over and they lived there. And then a lot of people died. Not all of them made it back. But do you have I just wonder, Chris, do you have a favorite hypothesis, or is there something that, you talk to a lot of people, you're really in the thick of things. I mean, is there something that stands out to you that really is kind of where your head's at right now with what's going on?
Yeah. The time stuff I would dismiss pretty rapidly prior to a few months ago.
Hmm.
And
I'm exactly the same, and I don't want to believe the time travel stuff. I don't like it at all, but I can't get away from it right now.
Yeah, part of me really believes that might be like the nucleus of the whole subject. Because if you take this gravity stuff and you take, all this information, I mean, the tech leads to that. That's where the tech leads to. That's the final boss of tech, right? There's gravity manipulation. There's obviously directed energy weapons with, gravitational lensing and like all this like crazy other stuff and portals and whatnot. But I think at the end of the day, when you're really, really looking at it, even the acknowledgement of any type of technology that has an effect on gravity automatically acknowledges that time travel might be an issue, which is, obviously a great reason to keep it secret. So the more that I believe UFOs, the more that my conviction level grows that, hey, this is happening. I think with the same breath, you have to also acknowledge the time stuff. I think they go hand in hand. I think if the technology is gravity, then you have to acknowledge this, right? And whether only that's in an observer shape, kind of akin to what Dan and Bob Lazar, talked about Looking Glass. And there's some other articles I read as well that referred to a similar type deal with like a crystal or something that like when powered up, it would, project something, and then the user interface would be psychic, so it would kind of show you your future, and that's subject to change as soon as you look at it, like this whole wonky time travel stuff. But even if it's only in that capacity, I think that can be enough to be an insane piece of technology, right? Even if we can't actually jump into the present timeline and change what's happening, if we have the ability even to foresee future events and then control variables presently to make a certain outcome happen, I think that can be a really effective piece of technology for anyone, right? And put money aside, but just like ultimate power, goal, even cover up, and the more I look into this, the more this idea of the Adjustment Bureau doesn't seem so far-fetched. When you have guys like Tim Taylor say, I'm the Adjustment Bureau, I work for the Hammer, and like as a throwaway comment, you go, wait, what? And you watch that movie and you start making these connections and you go, it is funny that everybody who's ever had evidence, it just kind of slipped between their fingers, isn't it?
Yeah.
From James Fox to having that tape to George Knapp having a witness corroborating Bob Lazar's story to all these things just feel like they're just out of reach, and it's almost comical. It's almost a joke. Like it's a farce when you look at it from the outside in. You're like, come on. It's just always slipping out of your hands. Well, maybe it is. Maybe it is. Maybe they are doing that.
Are you
somehow.
suggesting they might be actually like somehow using time travel to like pop around and like swipe evidence away from?
Not necessarily time travel, but if you have the ability to, let's say, see a certain timeline, this is hypothetical, but if you had an ability to see a certain timeline and make sure that timeline is what you wanted to happen for whatever reason, then maybe you can also have the ability to see the variables that affect that timeline. And so if that timeline is no longer the same, you go and snuff out that variable that made it alter. And so, you could just like look into this thing and be like, oh, this event here where this person talked to this witness actually triggered disclosure. And that's something we can't have happen because then we become them and then we die and this whole thing, right?
If you know that like the timeline where the calamity happens has XYZ person is president, and then you see that person's about to run for president, you could reasonably assume that like if we can get into the timeline where they don't get elected, then somehow we'll maybe
like Burish said with Hillary, right? Exactly. Like, but maybe that's also being used on like a personal level for personal gain, or maybe it's if what Burish is saying is true, then these J-Rod or the Orions or whatever they are, they're coming from the future, and they're coming to prevent something happening, right? They're coming to diverge this timeline so that we don't end up in whatever state that was, right? So yeah, maybe that's just sort of their version of what we're already toying with. You know, and as soon as we acknowledge that publicly that they exist, like disclosure becomes real and everything, you know, comes out in the open, maybe we inevitably start becoming like them. And that's what they want to avoid, because that's what triggered the event, perhaps, right? So for instance, if I take this pen back to, you know, 900 years ago and I leave it there, that'll change history. Like, they will undoubtedly drop everything they're doing to try and figure this out, right? They're going to replace quills. They're going to, like, all sorts of, like, and the plastic around it, they're going to be like, how is that made? So everything changes because we now directed all our attention to reverse engineering this thing, right? And so maybe they're here and they're like, we don't want you to know we're here because then you become us.
The prime directive kind of a thing.
Correct. Yeah. So I don't know. It's wonky and weird, but the more you look into it, and my conviction on Bob Lazar has never been higher than it is right now. And, you know, if what he's saying is true, then you automatically have to take Dan's claims somewhat seriously. Even if it's not, even if you don't believe him, you have to, like, yeah.
It's the perfect companion. It's like literally the flip side of the Bob Lazar story. On the other side of that coin is this other guy who was working on the creature, the fucking being. And you're working on the ship. And it's like, well, where did the biologics go? This is the thing. It's like all these whistleblowers come forward and they're like, you know, David Grush, and we have biologics. Biologics? Tell us more. But there's no one has anything more to say after that. Except this guy from 25 years ago who laid out 9 hours of interviews, and in it he was like, "Oh yeah, this is what it is. This is where it was from. This is what this is what's wrong with it. This is how it affects us." I mean, the criticisms against Bob Lazar were like, "Oh, didn't he have like he was involved in a brothel? There was like a prostitute thing. He's not who he says he was. He didn't have any degrees." They gave George Knapp basically levels the same critiques that people give Bob Lazar. In his article, which we have on our website, he makes those same critiques against Dan Burish, which is weird. Just considering that, you know, Bob gets a pass, I guess, and Dan doesn't. I don't know. They seem to me like two bookends to the same S4 facility.
I see what you're saying, but you also have to acknowledge that didn't they tell Dan to come forward?
I don't understand that whole aspect of it. They say. Yeah, I mean...
So they told him, oh, you need to go forward with this, right? And so, you know, that puts into question, maybe Dan was just there to discredit Bob. You know, maybe that is... And when you discredit someone, you don't just invent everything, right? You throw truth in there. So maybe Looking Glass, what Bob mentioned, is true. Do you know what I mean? And maybe the J-Rod is true as well. But maybe some of the other stuff in between intermittently might be complete falsehoods. And when you find that out, you just dismiss it entirely. And then because he leaned so heavily on Bob's story, the E115 being the power source or whatever, people automatically will discredit Bob now, right? So I see where George is coming from, that if you suspect that this might be disinformation, he does want to distance himself from that because he knows Bob to be telling the truth. And you can't say the same for everything that Dan Crane says.
And to be fair to George too, it could just be as simple as like these guys never connected, and George just had other shit going on, and he was busy, and maybe he just never looked at it again. And it's like, this guy, I don't know, like maybe he is real, maybe he's not, I don't know, but I just never got, you know, off on the right foot with him, so I went this way, possibly.
Yeah,
Xander, you have something a point you wanted to interject here. Do you want to jump in with this?
Yep. And you can go pee.
I'll be right back, guys. I have a whole French press every time we do one of these, so I gotta.
Right, I've got a bit of a rabbit hole to take us down. Oh, he switched his camera off. I thought his little empty room looked good. Let's.
He's also peeing in that room.
I will.
And as coincidence would have it, Xander, I have to go too.
Oh wow. Okay. Right. That changes everything. Hold
Be
on
back in just a second.
Oh my.
Yeah.
It's
I feel like
just
I
me
should
you
just
now.
leave at this point. I think I should just.
It's just me.
We can leave
now.
this
Hold
stream
on.
unattended.
Right. Okay. So this is. It's a shame because this might be quite important. I don't know. I'm gonna potentially take people down a bit of a rabbit hole for the next 2 minutes. So I want to go back to Bob Lazar's claims, physical claims, the claims about the physics of stuff. So he, back in 1989, well, early 90s, he talked about gravity being a wave. Now, at the time, it was a little bit fringe, but it was a theory. Gravity being a wave was a theory. It wasn't just gravitons. Then we found out LIGO detected gravity waves, and now all of a sudden gravity it's a wave. And that got me thinking, what other claims about gravity did Bob make? So he made the claim that there were two kinds of gravity. He made the claim that there was gravity B, which is the gravity that we all experience and is the gravity that we know of. And then there's gravity A, which works on the micro scale. I'm going to just switch off my biggest fan over here that keeps me cool in the English summer. Just give me 1 second. Beep. Right. So, given that Dan Burish has been, he talks about element 115 within the Looking Glass device, I wanted to see if there's any potential for Bob Lazar's claim of gravity going forwards. If there's anything that he says that could potentially become real, like he said, element 115 exists, and yes, it was discovered, albeit that like technically any element could exist with enough power behind it. So I started Googling different kinds of gravity and whether or not there could be multiple forms of it. And I came across an article by a physicist called Kurt Becker. He is the Vice Dean of Research and Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the New York University Polytechnic School of Engineering. And funnily enough, in November 2024, he uploaded an article, which I will share here. I believe he uploaded it to a website that is almost like pre-peer review. And Clint's back, great. So let me share this quickly. Xander share, here we go. Right. So, for a start, I need to point out I haven't had time. I've literally seen this today. I haven't had time to verify any of this. But this is an article about potentials of there being more than one kind of gravity, which, if confirmed at any point in the future, I think would be a huge plus for Bob Lazar, because as far as I know, nobody has talked about multiple kinds of gravity at this point. It's not mainstream at all. Gravity waves were a thing back in the early 90s, but this is just not a thing right now. So in my reading of this, and again, I will share this in the Night Shift Discord, so that people with more knowledge can read about this. They talk about 3 different kinds of gravity in here. The first kind being the Newtonian gravity that we all experience. The second kind being the gravity on the galactic scale, so that would be galaxies and involving dark matter and things like that. And then the third kind being the gravity on the scale of the universe. Now, one of these gravities, he thinks, might work on a subatomic level, at least, as in a quantum level of gravity. And if we were to take Bob's theories, or what he said about gravity A and gravity B seriously, then we have to consider the idea that this smaller level of gravity exists based on what this article says. I haven't been able to consume this article in full, I would like somebody else to read it because it makes more sense.
Did ChatGPT tell you if it thought it was legit?
So, ChatGPT, this is the article, by the way, for anybody that hasn't. So, 3 kinds of gravity. And yeah, it essentially talks about all the 3 kinds of gravity that are theorized. Vixra.org is almost like a pre-peer review thing. It is a bit fringe, this place, but from what I could find on Kurt Becker, he is quite reputable. So what ChatGPT said was that, so how this relates to Bob Lazar, gravity B in Bob Lazar's story is the same as as Newtonian gravity. That makes sense. Gravity A in Lazar's version is an artificially generated field that bends space-time, a controllable local warping of the fabric of space. And obviously Becker's paper doesn't go in to describe UFO propulsion, but his second gravity has gravitational strings, which is large scale, but it's also quantum level graviton streams slightly bending geodesics. This is some shit I don't understand, but there is a conceptual similarity between Bob Lazar saying that gravity A works on a micro scale and Becker's second kind of gravity also works using quantum interactions. They are much smaller reactions, and so the mechanism in spirit is kind of similar. Now, I'm probably jumping the gun way too soon there, but I just found it. I think that might be the next place to look, at least for the time being. Let's see.
I'm with you on this.
Talking about this,
I'm with both of you on this gravity thing. Like, I think that's really, if you can control gravity, you can control time. That's the real secret sauce. And if you have a gravity machine or a gravity control machine, you have a time machine. We know that T. Townsend Brown was doing these electrogravitics experiments back in what, like the 1950s, the early or mid 1950s. Have you seen these videos where he's got these test rigs? They're whipping around this. Have you guys ever seen this? The T. Townsend Brown videos? Chris, you have. They just run a high voltage electrical current through this very particular setup of the way that it's built, and it just has propulsion. And this is back in the 50s. I think Eric Weinstein and these other guys who were saying basically like this classified gravity research that really took off in the 50s and 60s, bared fruit in the 70s and 80s. And then that's probably at the heart of it. I almost wonder, there are days where I'm just like, how much of the alien expanded universe story, sort of the extraterrestrial expanded universe story, how much of that is just smokescreen for the fact that they've just got all of this really advanced gravity control technology?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, just muddy the water. Just, there's Nordics, there's fucking Greys, there's Mantis. Yes, it's all that, you could just spread all kinds of nonsense out there. And then meanwhile, it's just really, it's all just a confusion tactic to keep people guessing about what they're seeing, and when in fact it's really just a lot of it anyway, just classified military stuff.
It's impossible to really know for sure, as someone who isn't an experienced, with a lot of experiencers out there who, they're like, they'll bet their life on what it is they experience was like a Mantis or like a Nordic or whatever that is, But who knows? But as soon as you're meddling with any of that, with any nuclear stuff, with any gravity manipulation, I think if you were some type of other species, that's when the alarm would trigger.
Yeah,
I think that's it. Just makes sense. If NHI showed up, as much as they did in the late 40s and early 50s, if they showed up in the 1700s, right? I might be like, I don't know if I believe it, even though here and there. But when they started like ramping up is when we had all this sort of tech, from World War II and in the Cold War, and we had all these these nukes, and now we're playing with advanced radar, advanced laser, possibly gravitation stuff, with T. Townsend Brown. And so I think, it is that is the time that they would show up, right? So if it is a big smoke screen, it's, I think it's based in something real.
I'm always torn, like, between I know they mess with people. We know they put out fake information, fake stories. We've known this. There's just the whole history of ufology is about them messing with people. So it's like, whenever I think I know something and I feel good about it, I immediately start to suspect that, oh, maybe that's not true though. Maybe I'm just, because you just don't know what to believe.
Yeah.
Do you get any sense, like, well, you've talked to everybody. You just talked to Ramirez. What do you think about this idea of an event, a date? Do you get any heads up or any sense from people you've spoken to that there's a realness here that we should be thinking about? Something's going to happen.
Not nothing new.
Nothing new.
I think every, even John Ramirez said, he's like, I just repeated what I heard in the skiff or whatever. And we're still waiting on, was it Easter Sunday next year for Chris Bledsoe's thing? And then I'd like to see, we got Bashar.
Bashar.
All right. We got Bashar saying, he said a date. He said 2027. And he's like, if this timeline doesn't move or whatever. But like, we got Bashar and then we got Chris Bledsoe, both like honing in. I feel like as we get closer and closer to 2027, more people are distancing themselves from what they've said.
Yes.
Except for Chris Bledsoe and Bashar. I think they're doubling down. So I'm like, you know what? I'm team them for now, because they're at least giving us something to work with here. And if it doesn't come to be, then yeah, let's have that conversation once again. Definitely have the conversation again. Let's not forget about it. Let's talk about it some more. But like I said on the podcast I had with John, I was like, you can, because he's kind of sick of hearing 2027 after he blew the lid. I told him, like, well, you're not gonna have to worry about it in 2028, because everybody will just move on.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, that we always do, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I can see why he might be frustrated that people keep bringing that up.
And I'll be there for the 2029 prediction. I will be there.
Yeah, I've heard other dates too. I've heard dates later by really reputable people, and I don't want to repeat it because I don't believe it. I just think people just keep moving the goalpost, and it brings nobody anything positive, anything good in their life to like give them a date. I think it just causes this weird panic speculation sort of vibe. And like this, I don't think that that's productive at all to what we're doing. I think, cool information, nice, shelve it. But so I've heard different dates, and I literally like rolled my eyes when I heard them. I was like, come on, stop this. What are we doing here?
How could anybody really know? There would just be no reason to announce a date.
And if you did have like a certainty, it had to be based upon either an agreement or information, right? So either you have information now, that information is subject to change. Let's say we are dealing with timeline stuff. Then, just knowing about it perhaps makes it different, right? And secondly, if it is an agreement, well, I mean, then that's just like, there's nothing you can do about it. We might as well just, hold our breath.
That's if it is a timeline
thing. Building
thing.
a bunker, Chris. You got a bunker.
No.
No, not yet.
Yeah. I'm going down with the ship, dude. Let's go.
Chris, I'm just curious, like, where does your own personal interest in this subject stem from? Like, were you always into this when you were a little kid, or like, was there a moment where you just kind of clicked into the topic, or when did you get into it?
It was Fire in the Sky when I was 9 years old. Never expose your 9-year-old to Fire in the Sky, by the way. Insane movie. But I had an older brother. So, I was watching all types of stuff I shouldn't have watched. I remember watching like Event Horizon at a young age as well.
Ooh.
Horrific. You want to talk about interdimensional stuff. Like that's as dark as it gets. But that movie, Fire in the Sky, changed it for me because right at the beginning, there's, that title, it says based on a true story. And, I'm a kid and I'm like, you're telling me aliens are real. that's what you're telling me. Like, you spent all this money making this movie to tell me that aliens are real. That's kind of insane. And then what really bothered me, and it still to this day really bothers me, that the aliens never came back. They never told us why. No one got closure, right? So they take this guy, cool, I'm invested, I'm in. They beam him up, all right. They do some stuff to him, all right. And now we don't get to hear them talk to each other. They don't tell us anything.
Mm-hmm.
They drop him off. Don't say a word. Just leave and never come back. Never say why. And I'm like, this isn't right. Like, what's going on here? And that stuck with me to this day, where I'm like, you don't get to just take people and not tell them why. Like, what's going on here? Like, I want to find out. I want to know what you know. Like, what are you not telling us? It's like, it's like if somebody had earth-shattering information, you'd want them to disclose that. Well, it's the same thing for them. I hold them accountable as well. I'm like, hey, you guys are here poking and prodding. I think we should know why you're taking us,
So 9 years old, you see the most terrifying fucking movie.
Yeah.
I know exactly what scene you're thinking of too. That where they put the goo in his mouth and then he's got that plastic.
Yeah.
Oh God, it's freaked me out. 9 years old, you see fire in the sky. Somehow you make it through that, and then you stay interested in this topic. What's your journey look like for you from there? Do you stay on it? Do you have do you go on to other things for a while, or who do you follow? How do you get to where you are today?
Yeah, I always believed it. I always and I say believe because I was a young impressionable child. As I grew up, I learned to separate myself from belief and look at it more in a pragmatic way. But when you're a kid, you're like, oh my God, this is real. It's like, I feel it's real. So from there, I consumed all types of stuff that I could get my hands on, but mostly just like movies, documentaries. I remember watching like this psychic spy thing when I was younger. I remember, everything from Unsolved Mysteries to X-Files. And then eventually when the internet came out, well, I was knee deep in
you could
Bill
mainline
Schneider. I mean, yeah, Bill Cooper. I remember listening actually to the Al Bielek. This was like 15 years ago, or Al Bielek's like 2-hour audio where he talks about the time travel stuff. Do you ever listen to that?
No.
Oh my God. So this guy apparently, again, time travel, worked apparently with Tesla at the Philadelphia Project in Montauk, New York, where they had wrapped this copper coil around like this submarine to try and make it invisible on the radar. Well, it made it invisible IRL. And not only that, he was on board. They made a movie of this, but, a sensationalized fictional movie. But Al Bielek goes, on record talking about what happened to him. And he had his brother there with him who ended up dying tragically on this submarine or on this sort of boat. On the deck of the boat, people were like half in the boat, like crying, like just like intertwined with like the physical boat because of where they were in. They were in this like nowhere land where there was like this gray mist around the boat because he was like underneath in like a closed room or whatever. He was unaffected. So he came out to like screams and like this horrific scene of people like. And so he panics and he can't see the water. He jumps off board and then starts falling, and then eventually starts feeling like he can will himself, like he's not falling anymore, like he can, and then passes out, wakes up in a hospital in the future, like the year 2800 or something, and then lives a whole life there. And then they send him back to like the 80s where he has to get debriefed, and then goes back into like the 40s to like bust this machine up because he's messing up the timeline. Incredible story, but he tells it as if it's true. And he name drops Tesla, like that he worked on the project with Nikola Tesla and all these other scientists who would have been around during that sort of whole spooky era of nuclear, the atomic age. And diving down that rabbit hole, I remember I was like, oh my God, like, from that to the Dulce fights and everything else. I mean, you can't come out of those rabbit holes unscathed as a young man. You're like changed forever.
If you're even slightly a nerd even at all on the tiniest level, and then you come into contact with some of these stories, it's like crack. It's just like, it's so exciting. You're like,
Dude, it is.
You're telling me some of this is real, but we don't know what part of it is. What?
And even if it's science fiction, I tell this to my audience all the time. Take it as science fiction, and it's a phenomenal story, and it'll expand your worldview.
Yeah.
Just like Star Wars expands my worldview, and I start thinking about other civilizations because of Star Wars. And so, if you take it as fiction, great. And if you take it as fact, well, I mean, it's going to change your life. Like, that'll absolutely melt your brain. But yeah, either way, it's entertaining.
It's a gateway drug to so many other things. There was a guy, Xander, I think I just sent you this clip the other day. Tell me if you remember this, but it was a guy he was being interviewed by a UK, a British or a Scottish television presenter. It's black and white. It's in the 50s. And this guy is like, we're building a time machine the size of a building at a location. I was given the formula by a being that came out of a craft. And he told me have you heard this? You know what I'm talking about?
I don't know, man.
Okay, no one knows what I'm talking
wild.
about. Okay, hold on. There's a guy who there was an interview, and it was on UFOB the other day, and I'll have to locate it. Maybe you guys can just find something else for a second while I dig this up.
Well,
but he talks about building a time machine back in the 50s, and he's like, we've got the formula, we've tested it. It's the size of a building. It's enormous. I'll find this.
I guess I have a question for both you and Eric as well. Like, I think I'm probably on the same wavelength as you, Chris. Time travel doesn't sit well with me personally. Like, I don't like the idea of time travel. I like to think that we're in one thing that is linear. That just makes the most sense. When you unlock time travel, everything kind of goes out the window. And I guess, yes, that kind of makes sense. But I don't want to believe Burish's story. I don't want to believe any of the other time travel stuff. But like you said, Chris, and I even said this to the to somebody that does the artwork for me and Clint, the closer I get to this subject, the harder it is to ignore. And I want to ignore it, but I can't at this point.
You can't quit.
I can't quit. So
it's a soap opera for men. That's what it is. It's
Is there some sort of remedy to this? You're probably a few months at least ahead of this thought process. So what's the remedy to make this more accepting?
To make the voices stop? What you're saying, that you are just obsessed with it and you can't quit, and that's you're looking for advice?
I want advice about how to deal with time travel, because it just doesn't make any sense.
That's the one that you're like, you can't deny time travel if you also approve gravitational propulsion.
They're the same thing,
right? So like that's where people, anybody, even in government, that's like UFOs are real.
I can't connect it to backwards time travel. That's the only thing I can't. Maybe that's just like I haven't understood it enough.
Yeah, I mean, so the one thing that kind of rectifies it for me is, I always think the grandfather paradox, which is, you go back, kill your grandfather, but then your grandfather wasn't there to give birth to your parents, so you can't be there to kill him. But if, I do think that there is like this infinite timeline idea where like it expands outwards, not linearly, and it's kind of, you can travel to all of these things. And so if I were to go back and kill my grandpa, I would just be killing somebody else's grandpa, essentially. It wouldn't be mine. And then
you slide into a parallel timeline that's almost identical.
Yeah, exactly. It would not affect your timeline.
This is like the hit television series, 1990s TV series, Sliders.
Yeah.
If anybody remembers.
Love Sliders.
It's more than just a tasty little burger.
So if we're going with like the Brian Greene kind of scientific approach, then you exist. You're not going to unexist if you go back in time and change a past somewhere. So it's almost a bit like the multiverse, multiple timelines, and in like an infinity of different experiences.
So you might go back into the version of the timeline where last Wednesday you wore a green T-shirt instead of a red T-shirt, and otherwise every other detail about that timeline could be precisely the same.
Could be, yeah.
Maybe
vastly different. Yeah, I think that is easier to wrap my head around, actually, than I think everybody's trying to fit time travel into this sacred timeline model, and I think it just doesn't work. I think if you had time travel, it would look exactly like time travel, and it would feel like time travel, but you would actually just be traveling in alternate dimensions, and time ceases to exist. So you just bounce around at events and moments in time rather than like actually moving forward or backwards.
There's a great video that I watched on, it was years ago, but it does a really good job of explaining this. And it was on this holographic universe theory. And the person who's doing the explanation is basically saying, it's like, you just have to think that like all time happens all the time. Time is, we're experiencing it as this thing that's moving, but everything is already there. It's just one big continuous field, like a loaf of bread. And somewhere in there, everything is taking place. And it's just the way that we're wired is to experience it linearly. But I don't know, it just made a lot of sense. I found this video of this guy talking about this time machine. Can I show you guys this? Just the first like 2-3 minutes of this and get your thoughts? This is super cool. All right, let me share this tab. Check this out. I'm sure that you've seen this.
Machine you're building down in California.
Well, Jack, this was the result of a formula which was given to me by a man who landed a ship at my airport in 1953. And we put this formula under research, tested a number of experiments on a bench in a good electronics lab in Chicago, and we produced phenomenal results with evidence that we should do it on a larger scale in order to be able to do more with it. And this evolved out of something that started in 1953 into a 4-story high machine that we're working on down there today.
Now, George, I don't care whether the machine is 4 stories high or 40 stories high or 4 inches high. When I say calmly and unexcitedly, a time machine, what does your formula tell you you can do with a time machine?
Well, Jack, our formula has no time factor, which electronic formula does have. And on the other hand, electronic science has only had 2 dimensions to work with, the electric pattern and the magnetic pattern perpendicular to it. And we discovered a 3rd zone, which we call a time zone, and we are working through this zone with an effort to orient the magnetic field to give us other results than our science can obtain at present.
George, it's double talk to me. A time machine means to me a little box I can go into and go back 5,000 years or forward 10,000 years. Is that what your formula tells you you can do?
Well, Jack, this isn't a little box. This is a 4-story machine focusing fields that we can orient to produce this zone big enough for a man to get into. It isn't a box.
But what happens to the man when he gets into the zone? I'm all agog with curiosity.
Jack, we discovered this zone is subject to thought. Now, since time doesn't record events the way we do on calendars and clocks, you could only record an event by thinking of it. Now, theoretically, we believe we can take a videotape magnetic camera into the time zone and photograph Lincoln's Gettysburg Address or Caesar's armies marching or anything that's ever happened.
All right, let me get this straight. In other words, you're telling me, like H.G. Wells imagined 50 years ago, that everything that happened in time is still there to be seen by the recreation electronically of a thought which exists.
Jack, you know how you talk into a tape on a tape recorder and play the interruptions back, identical to the play that you made. The Earth's magnetic field is the same way. You can put interruptions into it and play them back out of it. An associate of ours in creating a magnetic coupler with this principle coupled in the Earth's magnetic field and played back TV shows from stations that aren't even in business anymore.
You mean an experiment has been done to bring out of the air television programs which have been and gone?
Been and gone.
Now, where was this experiment conducted?
It was conducted in Santa Monica by an associate of mine.
Why hasn't this hit the headlines throughout the world as that's a time machine in action? If I can...
I love this
Jack,
interviewer.
The reason it
He's so 1950s.
He's everyone.
So 1950s.
Oh, why is it like that?
You're telling me.
You can't just sit there calmly and say time travel.
This is what you were just talking about, though. This is it sounds like we're all talking kind of about the same thing, right?
And none of us have it like squared in. Like I feel like there's just part of this over and over again that just doesn't make sense with the human brain.
True.
Like we have, in some way, like Donald Hoffman says, we've evolved to create this sort of avatar that we view and experience the world through because it's evolutionarily advantageous to do so. It helps us reproduce, but the reality is we are experiencing maybe 5% of what's really going on. The core of it is time linear, or is it really like a cloud that you can like just dot around in?
Cloud.
And that's
we know that if you go fast enough, you don't age, but everyone else does. So if you just go into space in a conventional piece of technology that we have today and travel fast enough, you will come back to an Earth that has changed. But if you go fast enough, you could go 1,000 years into the future.
You will have aged, just in comparison to them, much slower.
But you won't be.
But to you have aged the exact same speed as you've aged before, because it's perspective. So you're not aging any slower. To you, time is the exact same. To them, it looks a lot slower.
So but what I'm getting at is, like, theoretically, with existing technology and our understanding of physics as it is today, we have the means to hypothetically go into the future.
Into the future,
somewhere.
yes.
To the future, yeah.
The past is different.
Mm-hmm.
That's the big thing, and I mentioned it maybe whilst you were taking a piss.
This was solved in a Choose Your Own Adventure book that I read when I was 9 years old, and if I can remember the name of it, I think it was called Journey to the Year 3000. If I remember right. I don't know if you're probably too young for Choose Your Own Adventure books, but
Choose Your Own Adventure books.
Yeah, you know what's up. So Choose Your Own Adventure books, for those who don't know, are these really cool little novels they made for kids. This whole series, and like you read through it, and you get to page 10, and it's like you're presented with a choice, and it's all in like you're the character in the story. So do you go left or do you go right? And if you go left, this is what happens. And as you go through the story, in this particular book, there was they used this technique to go forward in time, and the idea is that basically they're going to send this kid into orbit, and he's going to whip around at a certain speed. He's going to go into the future this way using our existing understanding of physics. The idea being that when he gets there, they will have already solved the backwards time travel problem.
Right.
And that's kind of the gist. And I wonder if maybe that's what's going on. Maybe it's like we know how to get from here to there, but only they know how to go from there backwards.
Yeah, or maybe, maybe the aliens that are interacting with us, let's say we do buy into this Dan Burish stuff, to bring it back to that. And that these aliens were 50,000 to 70,000 years, like in the future, different timelines. Them coming back, they're just fixing our timeline, by that sort of, they're not fixing their own. And maybe that's their warning, is like, for whatever reason, they feel the need to want to fix a timeline. And not one of the other infinite timelines that they could have jumped into. Why this one, right?
Yeah.
That's what bugs me. Is like, it's just like there's no. If you were able to travel seemingly back in time to separate timelines, to an infinite number of timelines, then why would you care what you affect in that timeline, right? Why would you care? Because it's not yours. You're now jumping into a separate timeline. So what would it matter that you affected that?
If only there was data you could take back to your own timeline to fix a problem in yours.
Right.
That would be the thing.
Yeah, that would be the thing. And then it becomes like maybe even like, because if you're in the quantum realm, the way I understand it, right, time doesn't function that way. There is no time, and space is kind of just like omnipresent. And there is do you remember in Rendlesham when he got that download apparently, and it was just a bunch of ones and zeros? Yeah. Wasn't there a study of someone, I forget who this was, but that said that if you were to send messages to the past or present in a quantum state, you would make this sort of binary code to where you could sort of read it in the past or present or whatever that. I forget where I heard this, and it might have been my discussion with Nick Pope on that podcast. But
like some kind of a quantum radio system, like a quantum.
Yeah, if you could like leave information in the quantum field
Yeah.
somehow, and then you would be able to access it no matter what time you're in, no matter what timeline, past or present, future, whatever.
I mean, that seems to be at the core of all this. It's like there's this like non-locality that seems to be at the center of how all this works. And I don't know, man. We have actually an audience question for you, Chris. Do you mind if I throw you an audience question? This is from Cole Watkins, who's actually our graphic design genius. He says, Chris, what do you make of the rituals and occult connections to NASA via guys like Jack Parsons and Tim Taylor? Smokescreen or legit?
Look what I'm reading right now. Literally on my desk, dude.
Wow.
That is some wild CIA work you got going on with your graphic designer. I don't know how he's remote viewing what's on my desk right now, but I am knee deep in Jack Parsons right now. I'm just fascinated, enamored by this guy. He's an absolute legend. Like when you look at, as far as the American rocketry goes, he was one of the founders of JPL. Also, precursor to NASA. It was this guy who did sex magic and did all sorts of like really bizarre rituals. Had a business with L. Ron Hubbard.
That's right. Yeah.
L. Ron Hubbard actually screwed him over and skipped town with his girlfriend. And then he summoned apparently this what was it, Marjorie Cameron or whatever, his wife. He kind of summoned her with the help of L. Ron or whatever, through some ritual. But yeah, it is very, very interesting when you look into that type of stuff, because you make these connections now to, what Diana Pasulka talks about with the rituals happening at NASA, and this Timothy E. Taylor fellow that we hear about. And then all the way back to the Nazis, obviously, doing a lot of ritualistic and esoteric practices around rocketry and around, allegedly, Die Glocke and all of this other stuff. So I think he's a very interesting person. And the fact that he got snuffed out of the history books, for his belief systems, because they were, obviously way more taboo than anyone was willing to talk about back in the time. But yeah, really interesting guy.
I swear to God, if I did not have Scientology being real on my 2025 bingo card for ufology, but yeah, Hal Puthoff's had connections with Scientology as well, so I don't even want to.
I'm not into the Scientology.
Yeah, I don't.
Okay, well, hold on.
Oh,
no, I'm not. I'm not pitching. All right, I'm not pitching for Scientology.
Are you sure?
But so this idea of this Gnosticism, I was looking into. Remember this book, The Alien Interview, with Lawrence R. Spencer, Matilda McElroy, exactly, who allegedly had this relationship with Errol, who was this survived being from the Roswell crash that communicated with her telepathically. A lot of what Errol was saying aligned a little too suspiciously with Scientology. Now, Lawrence R. Spencer was also a Scientologist. Now, we have to wonder, did one beget the other? Did he become a Scientologist because of what he found out? Or, is he just reinforcing his Scientology belief by creating this work of fiction? Those are things you have to look at. But another sort of anecdotal piece of evidence, the Farsight Institute, you look at Courtney Brown and all the work they're doing there. What do they refer to the soul as? Right? The Isbies.
Mm.
The same thing that they're talking about in the Alien Interview, right? That we're all Isbies and that this is a prison planet. John Lear talked about the prison planet idea. I mean, it all kind of loops together in this weird, incoherent mess. But I think Scientology, somewhere, there might be a seed of something that could possibly be of importance. A seed. Now, I'm not saying you got to like come clean on all your sins into this weird little machine and pay hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like that's not what I'm about. But this idea of the body being, a physical vessel for possibly the soul body, I mean, isn't just held in, it's kind of widespread.
I think there's something really to that. And I'm actually reading a book right now by Nigel Kerner called Gray Aliens and Artificial Intelligence. Have you heard of this?
No.
Basically, the thesis is that every civilization gets to a point where they either wipe themselves out or they develop artificial intelligence. And on a long enough timeline for every civilization, or most of them anyway, artificial intelligence dominates. It eventually becomes the dominant form of intelligence. And so the difference between an artificial organism and a natural living organism, you and me and other natural living organisms have that soul unit that is timeless and connected to the infinite source, right? If you build an artificially intelligent being inside the physical universe, it does not have that connection. No matter how intelligent it might get, it will never have this thing that an actual living being has, this soul. It just won't have it. And so Nigel's thesis, more or less, is that these gray beings, the grays, are drones from an artificial intelligence that is trying to basically figure out why, beings that have souls can manifest. It's like magic. We could do things that they can't do. We have this power they just never can have. No matter what they do, they'll never have it. So that's why they're fascinated with humans. They can't understand us. And it's just this really interesting take on that whole, like you said, the whole line of thinking.
We're the containers, man.
Container
Yeah.
soul.
That's what humans are.
Yeah, I mean, I think even animals though. I think everything's a container.
I mean,
even them to some extent.
If the base truth at the bottom of this whole thing is like your soul is a unit of consciousness that survives death, and that's the real player in the game. The game is so much bigger than just this 80 years that you have. There's other levels to it. You wake up when you die, you wake up someplace else and you keep going. And now what if you had a civilization that understood that for 1 million years?
Okay.
And they could go, and then when their soul passes on to the next level, they can come back and bring information back and forth.
Yeah.
What if that's the cycle that they can traverse that we can't, and they have the technology to come back and forth? That would change the entire, that's a paradigm shift that I don't think human beings could really handle right now.
Maybe there's a reason for that too, right? So maybe even I think in Bob Lazar's hypnotic regression, to get real spooky and weird, it talks about consciousness suppression as well, being one of the things that that they were doing. And so you have to wonder why. Okay, so it's a controlled experiment, right? That this isn't willy-nilly, that there is a direct objective here for wanting to suppress consciousness and accelerating evolution, right? Because they also have a hand in that, according to what Bob read in those documents as well. So you have to wonder what's the end game look like there? This sort of apotheosis, right? This critical mass of consciousness, minding experience, using genetic modifications to reach the pinnacle of consciousness in order to, perhaps become God or help the universe become self-aware. Whatever that, goal is, there has to be a goal if they've put so many resources into it, right? What are they feeding? What is happening?
It seems like on a long enough timeline, if you just distilled it all out, right? Like all life in different parts of the universe, you would have natural beings that are tied to the cycle of birth and death and the source, right? Soul units of individuated consciousness known as souls, right?
What Buddhism calls samsara.
And then separate, the only other category that would really matter in this scenario would be any artificial life. That eventually there would be one. It would dominate all others. There'd be just one form of artificial life, and that would be it. There'd be two types of beings, and there would have to be constant tension between those two types of beings. I can't imagine.
Balance.
Or balance.
That is balance. Maybe maybe information is the consciousness of the AI, whereas consciousness is like this more feely woo-woo spiritual thing that we have, and that's sort of like the good and the bad side of the force, and sort of like balancing it out in the universe. There's this supreme God. You hear about a lot of people who say, oh, it's kind of like God, but it's not God. Like you hear these NHI, in these interviews say this. And so you're like, well, okay, is it AI that you're referring to? And is there a difference there if they've reached this apotheosis? Yeah, I have this pet theory. I don't know how we're looking on time here, but
just a couple more minutes and then we got to wrap it up.
Okay, I'll save it for the next one.
No, you go finish your thought.
No, it's the start of a whole new thought.
He's gonna go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
We need to schedule. We need to have a separate day just for you, where you just come on and we all.
Yeah, all good. I don't want to hijack anything.
We just have a call with our mod team in the Discord, so we've got to break loose here and head over to that. But is there anything else that's not a whole new line of thinking you want to throw at people before we wrap it up?
Yeah, dude. I don't know. It's all very interesting to me. I think every theory is on the table. Period. I don't think anything's off the table for me. Equally, I hold some things higher than others, but I don't necessarily. I want to do with the idea of belief, and that's something I just want to keep telling people. Like, let's stop feeling the need to say I believe or I don't believe. Just talk about it. Let's just have the talk and gather the information. Who cares what I believe?
You just talked to some people on Area 52. You talked to Hakeem, right? And John. What else is going on over at Area 52? Can you tell us?
Yeah, I've got. Actually, it's funny because I'm doing this research. I just had a podcast with a good friend of mine, Hollywood director Darren Bousman. So he's the director of Saw 2, 3, and 4 and Spiral. And he is a real big fan of the occult. And so we talked a lot about that, but he also discovered like Umo, if you guys aren't familiar with Umo.
Is that the restaurant in New York that's really good?
No, it is a whole other rabbit hole. 60s and 70s, these thousands of letters spread out through Europe, allegedly by NHI. It's a really deep dive, but he stumbled on this type of like Umo sex cult that was happening. And anyways, crazy story. So that's coming up. And then today I got to pick up my good buddy, Paul Hynek. So he'll be coming on the pod soon as well.
Nice.
J. Allen Hynek.
Wow. How many people are coming in? Are you flying everybody in? Do you bring them all in?
Yep. Yeah.
And you pick everybody up yourself?
No, we have a driver, but I got to
God.
go meet him. Yeah.
I was like, how do you do it, man? You're so busy all the time.
Yeah.
Well, dude, this is awesome. Thanks for stopping in today. This was so cool. It's always great to see you.
I appreciate you guys giving me some airtime. Love the show. Big fan, big supporter of the Night Shift. Thank you to Night Shift audience. Thank you guys. Appreciate you.
You're the best, man. And Xander, Eric, anything else you guys want to add before we wrap?
No, another great episode. I find it interesting that time led into a discussion of consciousness, because these are the two things that keep coming back and back and back, especially with very close encounters with craft, something about consciousness and time. Maybe we'll figure it out next time.
Next week. That's the one.
It's always next week. It's always next week.
We'll solve it next week.
Keep them on the edge.
Xander, thank you again for another beautiful episode. This is amazing. And we'll see you guys again next week. We're going to take the rest of the weekend and do what we have to do to make our other channels grow and do all the other stuff. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for all the great questions. Thanks for participating in the chat. You guys are fantastic. If you want to support the show, you can do that by becoming a subscriber. If you're not already, you can also go visit us at teamnightshift.com. Check us out there. You can pick up a t-shirt, I don't know, coffee cup, something. Or don't. Just come hang out with us. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next week. Until then, keep looking up.